it is clearly that, you see, because the Saraswati is very central to the Rig Veda, as I mentioned, and then even after the loss of the river, it remains central to the Indian consciousness. Many prayers include the name of Saraswati, even as a river, even after it has disappeared. Then, of course, we have Saraswati, the goddess. And as I explained this morning, of all the Rig Vedic rivers, Saraswati is the only one that was turned into a goddess. So this goddess takes an important place in the Indian mind. She is first of all the goddess of inspired speech, later on goddess of knowledge, later on the goddess of the arts, and therefore the goddess of education, and so on. So this is, but the goddess lost her river out of which she originated, as it were. Ganga took the place of Saraswati in some ways as, river come goddess. Now, first of all, there is absolutely no ground to assume that this is a mythical river. What is meant by mythical? Why should the Rig Veda invent a river just to deceive us in the 20th and 21st century? The rishis, look at it from the point of view of the rishis. First of all, they list the rivers, Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Shutudri, and so on, in the Nadistuti Sukta. Why should they place a river which is not there in front of them? Then there are certain very physical descriptions about Saraswati bouncing down the hills, the mountains, about its impetuous flow. I regret that I cannot from memory repeat the shlokas, but we have all the original with us, and so on. Even forget about Rig Veda. When Mahabharata takes place, it takes place in the Kurukshetra region. As per the story, let us say, even if it is a story, doesn't matter. But why should Mahabharata, for example, tell us that when Yudhishthira and Bhima conduct their last battle, the very last, after the war, where does it take place? On the banks of the Saraswati. This is what Mahabharata says. It even adds a small details. He said, at a place which was not too sandy. At a place which was not too sandy, which means that there were lots of places along the Saraswati which were full of sand because the river had retreated. And if you have a lot of sand, you can't fight. So these small details are proof that we are dealing with a physical river. Even forget about Mahabharata, take the Brahmanas, which are commentaries on the Vedic Samhitas. There are several Brahmanas which speak of Saraswati disappearing, breaking up, and it disappears at a place called Vinashana. We all understand Vinashana. Even in South Indian languages, we can understand Vinashana. It is also called Adarshana, even in the Brahmanas. All right. Now this is a tirtha. It is a sacred place of pilgrimage in the Brahmanas, and there is a very important pilgrimage which consists of beginning from Vinashana and going upstream all the way to the source of the Saraswati in the Shivaliks. So how can we say that all this is mythical? Were they doing the pilgrimage along a non-existent river? I mean, we have to be a little sensible. There is no ground to assume that the Vedas were fanciful texts from that point of view. They knew their geography very well, and they had no business in. Now, apart from that, all, as I mentioned today, all the Western scholars, the geographers, the geologists. There was one R.D. Oldham, who was the first Director General of the Geological Survey of India, was a very eminent geographer. He worked a lot on the bed of the Saraswati in the late 19th century. We have archaeologists, we have a whole crop of scholars, all of them Europeans. Of course, there were also Indian scholars, but who had absolutely no problem acknowledging that this is the relic of the ancient Vedic river. Now, why does the problem come? Why is it that some people now are suddenly keen to say it's a mythical river? purely because of the Aryan problem. Because, I'll be very brief, when you excavate the sites in the Saraswati basin, now Saraswati, remember, is praised by the Rigvedic people, all right. They, according to the Aryan invasion or migration theory, it makes no difference, those hymns of the Rigveda were composed by Aryans who came into India, crossed the Indus tributaries, reached Saraswati, settled down. Some of them pushed on towards Ganges and they composed the Vedic hymns. That is the standard theory. Now that cannot explain why in the Nadistuti Sukta the rivers are listed from east to west and not from west to east. But okay. Secondly, when you excavate all this region where your Aryans are supposed to have settled down, what do you find? Harappan sites. There's nothing else. And the archaeology of places like Kalibangan tells us that those Harappan sites were abandoned around 1900 BC, which marks therefore the drying up of the river in the central and lower portions. The upper portion continued for a while. So, if 1900 BC river dries up and you find only Harappan sites in the basin of the river, where are your Aryans? They're supposed to have come in 1500 BC and to have reached the Saraswati by 1200 BC. These are the standard dates. They composed the hymns. By 1200 BC, there's no Saraswati. How can they praise the Saraswati as Mahoarna Saraswati, the Saraswati of mighty waters, when there is no Saraswati left? So, therefore, some Indian archaeologists like Dr. S.P. Gupta, Professor B. Bilal and others, and V.N. Mishra and more, very eminent all of them, started saying that in that case, we have to put the Vedic times not in the 2nd millennium BC, but in the 3rd millennium BC, because that is when the river was flowing. Because that is when we find the settlements. So this was not acceptable to a certain group of scholars who were, sold on the Aryan invasion or migration. That is where this whole mythical thing came up after 1984 to be precise, when this change in settlement patterns of the Harappan sites from mature to late became very clear. So this is the origin of the controversy. Before that there was no controversy, everybody accepted. It has been found, you see, hundreds of late Harappan sites. What is meant by late Harappan sites are meant post-urban, after the disintegration of the Harappan urban order, which is dated 2600 to 1900 BC through a lot of radiocarbon dates. After that, it's not that the Harappans are suddenly wiped out, they continue to exist, but they have to revert to a rural lifestyle. You see, it's because the delicate order that maintained the administration and statehood or whatever that maintain those cities, which are a totally different phenomenon from village life, that crumbled. So Harappans went back to a rural lifestyle, and in Haryana, Punjab alone, along the Shivaliks, 1,400 late Harappan sites have been counted. Very few of them have been excavated properly, but some have been partly excavated. We have the excavation reports both in Haryana as well as in Punjab. There is a lot more to do, and unfortunately many of these sites are disappearing due to mechanized agriculture, which is just wiping them out. But that is another story. So the evolution, and then not only the late Harappans not only moved north, as you say, towards the hills, because towards the hills there were still streams that were still flowing. You see, they were not able, the streams didn't have any sufficient water anymore to push through the whole central basin as before. But there were still streams, so they came when there was water. And some of them crossed Yamuna and Ganges and entered the Gangetic plains, which did not happen in mature Harappan times. So that, from the archaeological point of view, is now pretty solidly established. I feel awkward actually proposing steps when I know that many experts have already worked on this, but from what I have seen, like the example of this lake in Chandigarh, some experts, and this I am very sure because I have seen even from certain IITs, I have seen experts proposing steps which will work in the short term, which are clearly not sustainable in the long term. So if we want, see, water cannot be invented. You can't create water out of nowhere. So if we want this river to flow, that water has to come from somewhere. So either you dig a canal, and let us say, for example, I think that idea was once upon a time mentioned. For example, dig a canal from the Yamuna. You can draw some water from Yamuna into Ghaggar and it will work. But you are diverting, and Yamuna itself is dwindling down. So is it a sustainable solution? These are the questions we have to keep asking. Or, as Air Marshal suggested, you could even divert from a glacier. The tectonics have changed the whole relief, but you could conceivably drill a tunnel through some mountain and divert some glacial water into the Saraswati system. But again, you will be taking from John to give to Jack. So that has to be weighed. So what I said was, a more economical way of regenerating possibly a perennial river in the region is maybe not for the Saraswati, maybe downstream for the Ghaggar and beyond, is to first reforest the Shivalik hills. That will harm no one. Reforestation is always excellent. It has multiple benefits, and one of which is retaining the runoff water. So the second, which I said, is create thousands of ponds, not hundreds, thousands of ponds and reservoirs and check dams and all the now well-known water harvesting structures in Haryana, Punjab. And there that will recharge the groundwater enormously, and the excess water can be directed into the river system. So these are, now of course we are depending, as Dr. Bharat Bhushan said, this may not be the ancient Saraswati. Of course it may not be the ancient Saraswati, but I do not think that we can ever recreate the ancient Saraswati exactly as it was at the time of Rigveda. What would be, I think, very happy is to have a river flowing. And I think the two steps, because those steps which I have proposed are actually based on my experience in South India, and I know that they would work, for example, in the Western Ghats. Now, I am not sufficiently familiar with the local conditions here, I very honestly admit. So therefore, these are mere suggestions for people to think over and even reject if they are not suitable. Well, it does not, see, it's different. The Chinese mind doesn't work like the Indian mind. The Japanese mind also does. Every culture has its own way of working, right? We agree on this. I am not saying one is better, one is worse. I am not judging. I say they are different. And it is a fact that the Indian scholars of, let us say, the medieval times, or, you know, when they were discussing Mahabharata, medieval or even up to colonial times, when they were commenting on Mahabharata, when they were commenting on the Vedas, they were not concerned with questions of historical accuracy, of geographical location, of chronology, of all these questions which the Western Indologists kind of immediately pounce upon because they want things to be precise, located, etc. The Indian mind is more fluid and is less concerned with geography. For example, Saraswati. See, after the river disappeared, what did Indians or Hindus, if you like, do? But that includes also Jains, by the way. Jains also attribute a lot of importance to the Saraswati. What did they do? They created 20 Saraswatis all over India. There are 2 in Gujarat. There are 3, 4 in Rajasthan, Haryana. There is 1 in Bengal. There is 1 in Uttarakhand, etc. So they distributed the name because, why? It was kind of blurring the geographical accuracy. You see, it blurred it. But the advantage was that people remembered the river. And that remembrance plus tradition of worship, continuation of tradition of worship, are the 2 things that mattered to the Indian mind then. Not the, accuracy of the geographical definition. And this I have given a few more examples in my book. So I think in this way we can say that the 2 minds work differently. That's what I meant.
Thank you.